Kate, Kate Vigurs is an independent historian, author, lecturer and academic advisor. She's the author of Mission France, her previous book, and is a frequent contributor to the TV, radio and the press. And this afternoon she's here to talk with Mark Jones, the Associate Professor of Global History in UCD. And the format of the event will be, Kate is going to talk for maybe 15-20 minutes with some slides about her book, and then we'll have a conversation with Mark, and then we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for any questions from you. I'd be grateful if you wait until we have roving mics. I'd be really grateful if you waited until a mic lands before you ask a question. And also, the shorter your question means the more we get to talk to your fellow audience members. So Mission Europe is the remarkable story of the women who worked for Special Operations Executive across occupied Europe. And so in the wake of the Nazi invasion of Europe, the tentative sparks of resistance in occupied countries were fanned by Britain's Special Operations Executive. Across the continent, the SOE recruited women to set Europe ablaze. Working as secret agents and saboteurs, these individuals bolstered resistance from within and provided much needed support and weapons. F sections actioned in France are renowned, and today some of the operatives have become household names. But what about the ones who haven't become household names? So Mission Europe looks at the lives of these women who worked outside France and that didn't get the fame that was due to them. There also will be books on sale at the end, and Kate will be delighted to sign books. So could you please welcome Kate Vigurs and Mark Jones. Vigurs, sorry.
That's all right. Right. Good afternoon. So, I believe I'm starting. I'm looking at Mark all nervously. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to Dublin. It's my first time here, and I'm super excited to be here and in this amazing historic building and part of this amazing festival. So my job to start off with is to tell you a little bit about my book, why I wrote it, and to introduce you to some of the women within its pages. So, my first book, Mission France, was about SOE's F section. Let's start at the beginning. SOE, Special Operations Executive. It was founded in 1940 in the wake of the fall of Western Europe, so France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. And the idea was to send secret agents, men to start off with, just men, to go into occupied territory and set Europe ablaze. Sabotage. Subversion. This isn't intelligence gathering, these aren't spies, these are people who were going in to try and slow down the German war effort as much as possible. So, off they go. And in April 1942, now there's a disclaimer to come, there's 9 languages in that book. I don't speak one of them. Apart from English, obviously. So I do apologize for any mispronunciations. Don't come up at the end and tell me I'm rubbish at a language. I know, I'm well aware. So anyway, there's a forced labour programme, the Service du Travail Obligatoire, which is brought in Europe, so men of military age can be rounded up and sent off to work in factories, U-boat pens, for the German war effort. Women were not. So it was easier, I'm going to do it, easier, not easy, easier for women to move around enemy-occupied territory. So they start to recruit women. I would argue the women of France are perhaps the best known. And I think if you think about resistance, I think the mind goes to France first, apart from those of you who are thinking about hello, hello right now. Which is actually set in France, isn't it, of course? So that's where the mind goes. But there's resistance all over Europe, and that's what Mission Europe sets out to rectify. I want to look at other countries where SOE was working, not just France. Why is France so famous? Well, because 39 out of 400 agents were female. Because after the war, and a Dublin-born woman is responsible for this. I'll tell you in a minute about her. But the stories start to come out as early as 1945 about these women in France. Some of this is by mishap, some of it's because of war crimes trials, some of it is because the women are decorated quite highly with the George Cross, for example, or the MBE. And some of it is because the newspapers just loved a good story. And whereas men had their war heroes, women had their heroines in the guise of Violette Szabo or Odette Churchill, as the famous films of the 50s. Anyway, I didn't actually practice with how to work this. So I'm just going to very quickly introduce you to some of the women I hope you've never heard of, not wanting to take any wind out of your sails, Mark, but I just want to quickly whiz through a few of the women who've been living on my computer for the last 2 years, and now they're going to live in your hearts and minds, I very much hope. So this is Edith Bonnessen. Edith was born in Hellerup in Denmark. I'll skip over her early life because I've only got a short time, but there's a very good book that goes into lots of detail about all of this. Now, I came across Edith because I was researching SOE women in Denmark. I was researching Jutta Gru and Veronica Moos. And then nestled in the archives was little Edith. And her story is absolutely remarkable. So Edith starts her war by working for an underground newspaper in Denmark called De Frie Dansk, the Free Danes. Now, Denmark's a really interesting story when it comes to occupation in that they cooperated with the Germans. So they're not occupied in that kind of reign of terror that other countries are, for example, Poland or France. So Denmark is an interesting one. I have to be careful what I say, but basically Denmark was occupied before most people were even out of bed. So she works with this underground newspaper, De Frie Dansk. She's a contributor. She offers finance towards it, and she distributes it. 20,000 copies are distributed every week across Denmark. However, she's a very skilled wireless operator. And an operator for the resistance, a man called Dus Hansen, works for Bang & Olufsen. As we all know, they produce pretty good radios and speakers, so it's a good start. He needs somebody to work alongside him, and eventually Edith is chosen. Now, she's already been arrested 3 times working for De Frie Dansk. She manages to talk her way out of any situation that you can think of. So she goes to work for Dus. And on one particular occasion, she's in a warehouse, she's sorting out codes and messages to be sent out, and the Gestapo come knocking on the door. Now, her code name is known. She's known as Lotte. And when they raid this warehouse, they suddenly become aware that the woman hiding against the wall by the door is the famous Lotte. She realizes they know who she is, and in her hand, she has a coded message. This is one of those amazing things historians do. They go, and she ate it. All right, she ate a piece of paper while the Gestapo were in the room. Let's just think about it. Her throat was dry, her mouth was, probably as dry as anything, and she's trying to chew a bit of paper down. Anyway, she manages it. They think she's taken a cyanide pill, so they rush her out into the car, and she's driven to Gestapo headquarters, which is this building here in Copenhagen, known as the Shell House. Known as that because there's a Shell petrol station underneath. Got 5 floors here of Gestapo headquarters. Edith is taken in, and the guards are so impressed that they've caught the famous Lotte, they decide to have a few drinks. So they take her up to the 2nd floor, leave her on a bench. They all go and get sozzled. They take her in for interrogation. She's terrified at this point. What are they going to do to her? But they're so happy to have her. They ask her a few questions and put her back out in the corridor again. And they go back in and carry on drinking. And she thinks, well, there's no one around. So she decides she's going to make a break for it. If anyone stops her, she's going to the toilet. And she starts to make her way down. So you can see the stories behind me. She makes her way down the stairs. There's 2 civilian men in the building. She kind of tags along behind them. And as they get to the main door of the Shell House, one of the gentlemen opens the door. Bitte schön, he says, and gestures for her to go through. And she walks out of Gestapo headquarters. I mean, the gumption of the woman. She keeps walking, she eventually she takes off a white turban. That's a very important part of the story. She gets back to Dus, who says, where were you? And she said, I was in the Shell House, but I didn't like the smell of the bakery. Now, everybody is curious, how does a woman get out of Gestapo headquarters? She must be a double agent. but she's not. However, a very famous SOE agent called Citron doesn't believe her, so he has her arrested by the resistance. And she manages, just before they pull out their guns to shoot her, to convince them that she really is on their side. So she's taken back home. And to apologize, she's given a bunch of pink carnations. They had their guns on her, and they say sorry with some flowers. And the men who arrested her have their cigarette ration taken away from them for a month. She's blown. She goes to live in Stockholm for the rest of the war. So another lady, in fact, we'll talk about her, I think. We'll come back to that lady there. Another lady who actually features in my first book, but I wanted to introduce you to her, is a lady called Patricia, or Paddy O'Sullivan. Has anyone heard of Paddy O'Sullivan? Oh, you will now. The whole of Dublin, forget the NFL game. It's going to be Paddy Sullivan by tonight. So she was born here in Dublin in 1918. She was educated at St. Louis Convent, but she was brought up in Belgium. So by the time she was grown up, she was fluent in Belgian, Dutch, French, and obviously English. She is recruited into Special Operations Executive, and she is infiltrated into France in March of 1944. Now, she has the code name of Marcel Simonet, or Schwimene, and I love her infiltration story. So has anyone out there parachuted? Anyone? There's a hand over there. Did you enjoy it? You did. She didn't particularly enjoy it, and apparently she was kind of clinging to the outside of the aircraft, and eventually went face first, which she shouldn't do, apparently. So she goes face first, she sort of flips, lands on her back, thinks she's broken her spine, and she falls unconscious. When she comes to, or the reason she comes to, is she can feel breath on her face. And she thinks it's a German, and she thinks, do I play dead? And she kind of peeks with one eye, and it's a cow. And she's landed in a field of cows, basically. She's also landed with a hefty sum of 2 million francs strapped to her derriere. So she didn't break her spine because her landing was padded by this wad of cash. Now, she's not expected, well, an agent's expected, but certainly not a woman. So they're horrified that this lady's arrived. Her circuit leader, called Maya, says the job was too tough for a girl. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, she's going to stick out like a sore thumb. He doesn't really want to keep her. It also transpires she can't ride a bicycle. She's gone into occupied France. There are no cars. So they teach her to ride a bicycle, and she's constantly falling off, and all the Germans are watching this. Now, they must have been thinking every French woman could ride a bicycle, but they're watching her, they're laughing, they're having a jolly jape, and eventually she's cycling up to 50 kilometers a day, taking wireless messages backwards and forwards. But her security wasn't very good. She talked too much. She was also a very heavy smoker. Now, this isn't a criticism, but in France, during the occupation, women didn't get a cigarette ration. So it became very obvious very quickly that she's puffing away in the pub or the cafe, that, you know, she's making herself obvious. So her circuit leader asked for her to be replaced. This, in fact, doesn't happen. D-Day's on its way. Everything's a little bit busy. And when a replacement is found, he actually says, do you know what? I've trained her. She's useful now. Leave her be. Useful is an understatement. This woman sent 300 wireless messages around D-Day. These are messages asking for agents, for equipment, sending intelligence, working out targets to be blown up around D-Day. She hid her wireless sets all over the place, under piles of wood. She buried some of them, and she always had somebody in another room making noise to cover over the tapping of the Morse. So somebody was singing, apparently, and another lady played her radio very loudly, just to make sure that everything was all right. So she trained up 2 wireless operators herself, and she was in the field for 7 months before she was finally sent back to the UK. And this will be because the area was liberated. The plan was to send her into Germany, but something happened. Somehow, the Daily Mail got hold of her story. It had to be the Mail, didn't it? The Daily Mail got hold of the story and blew it wide open that she had been working in occupied France. So instead, she then gets sent to Calcutta, where she kind of disappears from the records, to be honest. We know that she marries the taller chap in this photo, a Mr. Alvary. This is their wedding photo, and I put this in because I want that frock. I think it's just glorious. She gets the Croix de Guerre and the MBE. So there's Paddy for you. And just another lady, briefly, if I may. Oh, I'm not doing too badly. This story breaks my heart. And this woman, if we don't get a chance to talk about her, I want you to go home with her in your heart. This is Hannah Senesh. Hannah Senesh was born in Budapest. She was brought up Jewish, but not strictly Jewish. In fact, she went to a Catholic school. However, she was very interested in her Jewish heritage, so she joined the Zionist movement, and as a result of that, became very keen on the idea of emigration to Mandate Palestine, which she completed in 1939. The stuff we know about Senesh comes from her diaries and letters. She was a fierce writer, and it makes it so very interesting because you get inside her head. In spite of this, she decided she wanted to start from the ground up, hence the picture of her completely surrounded by chickens. She went to an agricultural school at Nahalal in Mandate Palestine, where she studied for 2 years, and then she would have gone on to work in the kibbutz itself. However, war breaks out. And the fact that there were 37 Jews from Mandate Palestine trained up by SOE to be infiltrated back into Europe should be sung from the street tops, and it's not, the rooftops. It's not. People haven't heard of these men and these women. So she undertakes a role. She's going to work in escape and evasion. She's going to help Allied airmen. She'll be going back into Hungary, out of Hungary. Her secondary role is to help the beleaguered Jews of Europe. The deportations by now are well known. The terrible deportations from Hungary haven't happened yet, but she wants to help the Jews as well. So she joins up. She's in her uniform. She loved parachuting, like you, madam. She loved it. She couldn't get enough of it. She asked if she could go up again and again, and she just loved seeing all of Caesarea spread out underneath her. She was a very skilled wireless operator too. These are the men that she parachuted in with. She goes in with Tito's partisans for 3 months in Yugoslavia, and then decides now's the time to go to Hungary. You don't just pop across the border. She swam. She took her wireless set apart, took a bit of, as much as she could carry across the river, swam backwards and forwards, until they are in Hungary. And the minute she arrives in Hungary, she's arrested by the Arrow Cross, the Hungarian fascist regime. They take her to a prison, and her mother is brought to the prison. And they say to her mother, "Where's your daughter?" And she says, "She's in Mandate Palestine. She's safe from you lot." And then they walk Hannah in through the door, battered and beaten. And this is a whole form of torture in itself, to have a mother and a daughter in prison together. They were kept in solitary. They were kept away from each other in this hellhole in Conti Street Prison in Budapest. She was tried as a Hungarian spy, and she was sentenced to death. And she was told she could appeal, she could admit she was a spy, or she could go to her death. And she chose death. So she was executed by firing squad within earshot of the cell of some of the other Hungarian nationals who had gone in with her. She was 23 years old when she died. Her mother had been released from prison at this point. She came in with a lawyer, hell-bent on helping Hannah, and it was too late. So as part of my research, I went to Budapest. I love this little statue of her parachuting into Yugoslavia, and the other memorial is the site where the wonderful Hannah was executed. And she wrote a poem just before she died. There's a snippet of it here. "Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart." She's in your heart now as well. And That's my little introduction into the work that I've been undertaking for the past 2 years, and I know you've read my book, so I hope you liked it. Otherwise, this is going to be a terrible conversation.
Kate, that was so fascinating. I think Bula Bus.
Thank you. Thank you. That's just a handful of them too.
I'm a bit dumbstruck for words, because how do I follow such a story? The story of Hannah's and her mother, and the scene in the book which brings that what you've just told us now to life in so much detail. It is, I think, one snippet of the book which I've read as a whole, which really grips you. That's the first thing I actually want to say about your book. I want everybody here to read this book, because it's a book that you will pick up and you won't be able to put down. It's really, really gripping. But when you finish it, it's also one of those books that you won't stop thinking about, because you'll think about something like Hannah and Katerina saying goodbye to each other in the prison. You think about the mother and the daughter. You think about the moral conundrums that come with that kind of story. And one of the things you didn't have a chance to say is that when the reason she's caught when she first reaches into Hungary is one of the other men in the group is caught by the Gestapo, and he immediately commits suicide. Yeah. And so, this is I think the extraordinary lives in this book that you really bring to life. And I want to maybe come down from Hannah. I was going to ask the question, who's your favorite character? Hannah is my favorite character in the book. I've got another one I can. But I'm going to start with the alternative, which is, who's your least favorite character? Because there are some spies who switch sides.
There are. So I had to make a very difficult decision within the book to put in baddies as well as goodies, because I want to show these are human beings with very difficult decisions to make. And we might all say, of course I wouldn't collaborate, but we just don't know. So there's a lady called Mathilde Carré, known as La Chatte. She was a Red Cross nurse when France falls. She's a dubious character already, to be honest. Bit of a man-eater. Anyway, she has had a failed relationship. She's standing on a bridge. She's going to commit suicide. He doesn't love me anymore. And then she has a revelation, or so she says, that she would rather commit a useful suicide and fight for France, and should she be executed, so be it. So she decides she's going to join the resistance. And fortunately, she goes to a restaurant where the resistance hang out. And there's a man called Roman Czerniawski, who's Polish. And after a few meetups, he tells her he's in the resistance and he would like to set up a network from Paris back to London, sending intelligence. They will call it inter alia, because it's an allied effort. He's Polish, she's French. They're going to recruit loads of people. And so they start picking up things like troop movements, weapons dumps, all the kind of intelligence you need to win a war. That's what they're going to do. And they send the information back to England. It's really convoluted. Bit of tissue paper behind the toilet cistern of a certain train going out of Gare at a certain time. And there'll be somebody else to pick it up at the other end. But they had a 100% success rate. But just a year into Allier, Czerniawski is arrested, and Mathilde is arrested the next morning by a man called Hugo Bleicher, who is Abwehr. He's intelligence, German intelligence, counterintelligence. And he says to her, I've got Czerniawski, I've got his girlfriend, I've got you. Now you've got a choice. You either work for me, or I'll shoot you. And I've got enough evidence to shoot you 7 times over. And just like that, she says, it's fine, I've got a book with 65 names and addresses, where shall we start? And they start the next morning. They go down to a pub where she has a rendezvous. Bleicher, I don't have the photo of him, annoyingly. He's wearing the most ridiculous beret. He might as well wear a string of onions and a stripy t-shirt. It's cultural appropriation at its height. And resistance. He sits at this table next to Mathilde, La Chatte, she calls herself, because she thinks she moves like a cat. And they offer this chap a lift home, and once he's in the car, Bleicher says, you're arrested, and this chap turns around and took the words out of my mouth. He says, what a slut you are. But they just work through the address book and arrest all these people. But it's worse, isn't it? Because her and Bleicher start an affair. It's bad enough collaborating, but you don't have to sleep with the man. She moves into his apartment. She eats his foie gras. He plays the piano. They go to concerts. She's just living the high life as a collaborator. Eventually, she finds a way to get back to England, and she's kind of decided she's going to become triple agent, but really, she comes to SOE headquarters in London, and I think if she'd been given half a chance, she would have brought it down to its knees. Fortunately, they knew who she was, and she was placed under house arrest. And eventually, she was sentenced by the French as being a collaborator and put in prison for 10 years. And the man who looks after her under house arrest, I quote him in there, he hated her. He said, God, she's so pedantic and petulant and childish, and she'll throw tantrums if you don't do the things she wants. Yeah, she's just not a nice person.
Do we know what happens to Bleicher? To her?
He wrote his own book as well, but off the top of my head, I don't remember. But he certainly, lives a long and full life.
Okay. And then coming back to the original question, I've said Hannah's my favourite character. Who's yours?
Here's one I prepared earlier. Oh, there she is. Jeanne Boeck is my fave. So being a historian can be a little bit dull. You go and sit in archives, and they're really silent, and you're not allowed to make any noise. And
this is not true. The life of a historian is wonderful.
The archive bit, don't you find it a little bit... Anyway, sometimes you're pouring through going, oh, God, someone have a really crunchy story. This girl turned up. And you've probably noticed I like to talk a lot. That's why I think archives are boring, because you can't turn to the person next to you and go, my God, I've just found something amazing. I found Jeanne Boeck. Her hobbies were listed as homemade explosives. Her file says she liked a bit of rough and tumble with the lads. She was a tomboy. And I looked at her file and I thought, this woman is a gift. She was 23 as well, same age as Hannah. She had been a chemist when war broke out in the Moulin Blanc in Brest, where she'd been learning how to make explosives. She escapes at the fall of Brest. She comes to England and she wants to continue working in chemicals. And they're kind of experimenting with things. And she says it goes really well. Apart from that time, my colleague blew his hand off and I picked his fingernails out of the curtains for the next week. Thanks for that. She wants to join the Free French once she's found out who de Gaulle is. And she wants to be an explosives instructor for them. But women, there's no way they would give women that job. But she chips away. And eventually, she says, you're wasting your time. If I have to teach the men, and then the men go and teach other men, we're wasting that bit of time in the middle. Just let me go. So she goes into France, and she teaches men how to blow stuff up. And why I love her is a month before D-Day, she is asked to go and prototype practice blowing up a railway to show how you do it. So it's a prototype of Plan Vert. So she goes out and she said, I had the right bits and pieces, but I didn't have any detonators. So I went to the chemist and I got a tube of aspirin, tipped out the aspirin, put the stuff I needed inside it. I'm not going to tell you how to build bombs. The stuff goes inside it and she blows up a railway line. And the resistance go, that's brilliant. A month later, 960 railway lines are blown the night before D-Day, and it's because of this girl here. I just love her. She seems full of fun. And blowing stuff up.
She's an amazing
yeah,
story. I think, just to add to that, I think the thing that stayed with me from reading it was when they were not sure whether they could trust the French resistance to blow up that amount of train network in that proximity to D-Day. So there was a question, this isn't just, can you, Jen, do this? It's, can the French pull this off that close to D-Day? And so it's really, really vitally important from a military perspective too. And that, in addition to all the character she is, she's actually really important for the course of the war.
Massively so. I mean, I think the role of SOE in the resistance around D-Day is massively underplayed, but it's so important. If those train lines weren't blown, once the Germans had realized the Allies were arriving in Normandy, not Calais, and they mobilized, they'd have just got on those trains and been there, but because the train lines are out, everything's slowed down, and she just plays a massive part in it.
There is a sadder illustration of the importance of train lines in the book as well, because at one point there, moving French prisoners into German concentration camps in Germany. And the train lines, if my memory is correct, are they have to get off the train and start walking. And some of those women end up in Ravensbrück concentration camp, which has an extraordinarily high death rate for French women prisoners. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, but also about the 4 women of SOE who end up there, who have been forgotten to an extent, I think.
They have. So actually, I've got that as well. When I was researching Mission France, in fact, my initial proposal was to write about the 8 women of F section who end up in that camp. So if you don't know of the camp, it's just north of Berlin. It's a women's only camp, to start off with at least. And it's just a place of abject brutality, medical experiment. It's just horrible. And it's a place where resistance are taken. So there's some fantastic books. Caroline Moorhead's book, A Train in Winter, really goes into good detail. But whenever we talk about SOE in Ravensbrück, it's always the women of F section, so very famous names. And when I was researching, I kept finding this reference to 4 women who had been hanged, but then it's always overshadowed by the 3 women who were shot. And in the end, I thought, I wonder if the eyewitnesses are just getting confused. You know, you witnessed this brutality, perhaps you are forgetting, misunderstanding. But then it just kept coming up, and I thought, I'm going to have to look these people up. And they were RF. So F section was run by the British, RF, Republique Française, run by de Gaulle. And within RF, there's this group of women called the Merlinettes, the wireless operators. A lot of them were based in Algiers. They trained in Algiers and then came into France. And there's quite a group of them, but these 4 in particular were very good friends. So we've got Marie-Louise Cleurec, Eugénie de Gendy, Pierrette Loin, and Suzanne Mertezan-Wort. I'm sure that's not how you pronounce it, but I'm doing my best. Now, these 4 women end up in Ravensbrück. Now, because they are in the corps féminin, they are uniformed. They're not uniformed once they're in France, and this is where it falls apart. Because if you were not uniformed, but you were undertaking this kind of activity, you are liable to be executed. It's in the Geneva Convention, unfortunately. So Hitler took it to an absolute extreme and had these kinds of people deported to the camps. However, they kept saying, because we are in the corps féminin, we should be treated as prisoners of war, not as spies. And the problem is, especially Eugénie, keeps going up to the SS. She goes up to the commandant and says, we need better treatment, we need better food, we need Red Cross parcels, we need better accommodation. And in doing so, she's kind of making herself really well known to the commandant. And Eugénie becomes very good friends with an F section agent called Yvonne Baisden, whose affidavit gives us the sort of final details, really. And Yvonne's sort of saying, just keep your head down. Just don't make yourself known, and maybe you'll get away with it. Eventually, these women are called into the commandant's office, and there's a telegram on the desk, and he says, we've had news about your treatment, so just make yourselves available. And he never tells her what's in the letter or the telegram. And it's a telegram saying they should be executed. So they are told to get themselves ready, probably thinking they're going to be released, and they're taken away and hanged. That memorial there, those are my roses that I'd taken. That's only been in place for a few years at Ravensbrück. It certainly wasn't there the first time I went, which was 2007. So finally, their names are out there and they're known. And, you know, thousands of women perish in the camp. But if we're talking about SOE, it's important that all the SOE women are remembered.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned there that you put the flowers on the memorial yourself. Did you travel a lot for research for the book?
Yes, massively so. I was really lucky to get funding from, I have to take a breath because it's a really long name, the Jerry Holdsworth Special Forces Charitable Trust. So they wanted these names to be out there as well. So that I did get funding to allow me to travel, and it was a tough job, but someone had to do it. So I started in Poland, in the home of gingerbread. So a terrible time. It was, you know, UK archives, you know, you're not allowed to take anything, are you? You can't even really breathe on them. In Poland, they're bringing me gingerbread and cups of tea and, you know, get your fingers into Agent Zo's files. But it was brilliant. So I went to Poland, Budapest on the trail of Hanesenesh, went to Copenhagen, I went to Ravensbrück again, and the Netherlands as well. And the Netherlands was really wonderful because there was a letter I'd been looking for. I knew it had been written, and I assumed it was it's a letter to Arie Neve, who was an MP after the war, and I assumed all his archives must be in the parliamentary files. So I traipsed down to London, and getting into parliamentary archives takes hours. And when I got there, the lady said, "It's a very thin file," wafting this piece of paper at me. And I said, "Well, I'm here now, I'll just play on the internet for a bit." But the file was in the Netherlands. And that was another happy dance when I found this letter, which was from a lady called Trix Turvent to Arie Neve, talking about surviving Ravensbrück again. She survived Ravensbrück.
Brilliant. Just thinking, you mentioned that the SOE agents were flown in, and usually had to jump out of planes to land on the ground. And you mentioned a couple of times in the book how the welcoming groups who are the partisans or resistance fighters are often surprised that it's a woman. And so I'm slightly running out low on time here, so I want to ask two questions really in one. One is which, did you get the feeling that them being women really mattered when they got to interact with partisan groups? Because it seemed to me that after they get over that initial shock, they seem to just accept that women can do this job. And that seems to me a part of the story of the book. The other thing I want to ask, because we mentioned the parachuting in, but some of the stories of how they get out are extraordinary. I was crossing the Pyrenees, being picked up by plane, hiding in the water cooling section of a train to get you from the occupied France into Vichy. These are extraordinary stories. So perhaps the two questions as one. First of all, the question of what does it mean for them to be a woman in occupied Europe as agents, and also then a little bit on how they escaped.
I think once they're in the field, there's a certain amount of parity between the men and women. If you look in the files, it nearly always says the women will work as a subordinate to a male leader. And that's because, I guess, women had never been in these sort of positions of authority before. But when women were pushed into those positions of authority, and it was with some nervousness, especially in France, which was a very patriarchal society, these women really felt they had to prove themselves. However, when they're working alongside the partisans or they're working alongside the resistance, they seem to have a great... Once the women have won them over, and as we saw with Paddy's story, that takes a while. But once they're won over, there's this respect and admiration and affection for these women as well. And I imagine there's an amount of protectiveness around them because women haven't done this stuff before. But they prove themselves 1,000 times over. So yes, I do think SOE was kind of an equal opportunities employer in that respect, in that you were trained the same, you did the same work. You'd be rewarded the same or punished the same. There's no room for women can't do it, because they could, and they did. And your second question, getting out again. So Elżbieta Zawadzka, who went she was Polish, and she was given a mission to get to London. She had to bring a message to General Sikorski, who is the Polish government in exile. And she also had a missive, which was brilliant, to get women equal recognition in the Polish Home Army. So both were very important missions, but she tries 4 times to get over the Pyrenees and into Spain, and then managed to get out. And the first time, I think, she ends up in a big pile of snow because all the men around her are arrested. The second time, they go round in circles because the leader's a bit rubbish. And the only reason they realise it is because one of the party fell back and actually froze to death, and they found him, and she was like, we've gone round and round. And yet, eventually, she hides in the water tank of a locomotive with 12 other people, I think. So they're kind of, sardined head to toe. And it spurts dirty water over them as well, doesn't it? So they're sitting there soaking wet. Can't say anything, can't move, can't whinge, because if they make any sort of noise, the train will be searched. So they go to extraordinary lengths to get in and to get out, and to get these missions done. They don't complain, they just crack on with it.
I mean, her story's
it's just bonkers, isn't it? I've mixed the stories up a bit there. She gets across the Pyrenees, then she has to do the locomotive journey. But goodness me.
She also, what I recall from reading, is she fails to cross the Pyrenees and goes the whole way back to Poland.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a case of, I'll go back to the village in the south of France
she goes all
and
the way
wait a little
back.
bit. It's like, okay, that hasn't worked. We have to go the whole way back to Poland and then try it again. And, you know, everybody knows what country you have to cross through if you're going from Poland.
She's so self-effacing. She works on various courier routes, and she says after the 100th time, I just stopped counting. Are you what? I held a key in my hand that was the key that she hid her microfilm in. They just handed me this key. I didn't know what it was. And then as I started researching, I was like, oh my God, that's the key that had the microfilm wrapped around inside it that she had in her pocket, that she was taking across the borders.
What a brilliant,
just
brilliant
amazing
experience.
people.
She would probably be my second favorite character.
She's
in the book.
absolutely
She's
brilliant.
Really brilliant.
Yeah, she goes on to fight. She's the only woman taught to parachute who goes back into Poland. So the silent and unseen, they're known. She sort of lies low for a bit and then gets involved in the Warsaw Uprising because, you know, she doesn't feel like she's done enough yet. And then she helps in the wake of the uprising. And then she's arrested by the Russians after the war because she'd been a resistant against the Nazis, therefore she could be a resistant against them. So she's put in prison. I think she serves 10 years, and then she comes out and gets her PhD. She's just brilliant. What a lady.
There's so many stories like this in the book. I really, when I said at the start that this is what this book is about, gripping stories that you will continue to think about long after you finish reading the book. I'd like to talk for longer, but I'm aware that many of you probably have questions and questions that you would like to ask Kate while we have her here. So I'd like to open the floor